This is the perfect segue into this next section, because what we've heard from a lot of the patient advocates that have been involved up until this point is all of the things that they've been doing to get and attract interest by these researchers. So how have they become research ready? What is it that they're developing that's actually allowing them to build these collaborations and partnerships, et cetera? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the one and only Karmen, Wendy, or one and onlys, Karmen, Wendy, and Rachel, to kind of share the next bit of information and insights. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Oh, that seems very loud. So first we'll introduce ourselves and then introduce a little bit about this topic. I think it's always kind of hard to be the last speakers in a long stretch when Nicole doesn't let us even pee. But actually it's kind of perfect that I think that we're last, because I imagine for a lot of the patient advocates, parents who are out here, there's all these ideas and all of these possibilities of what can happen in front of you, but oh my gosh, where to start? How to get started, how to prioritize what can be done. And I think that's what we're trying to work on and what we're gonna try to provide a framework for. So I'm Karmen Trzupek. I direct scientific programming for RareX. I came on board about 3.5 months ago. So I can take 0 credit for anything that's been built. I'd like to be clear about that. It's amazing what has been built. And now I really have the responsibility and the honor of taking that data that has been collected, that's being collected, and ensuring that we deliver on our promise of using it and using it well to accelerate therapies. So there are a number of research initiatives that fall under that. Charlene talked about our Open Science Data Challenge that I'm very involved with. Everything that we do with data that we move over to the research analytics platform, I'll be involved with and hopefully working with some of you. And then I'm working very closely with Rachel currently on developing this research roadmap, this sort of research readiness roadmap. So I'll turn it over to the two of you to introduce yourselves and a little bit about your work in rare disease.
Sure, thanks. So I'm Wendy Chung. I'm a medical geneticist and wear several different hats, but 2 of the hats are being a professor at Columbia University and also being the director of clinical research for the Simons Foundation and the Safari program for autism. And I've been in the rare disease space basically my entire career. And with this, I think had the real pleasure of being able to see from the beginning organizations like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, Cure SMA, SMA Foundation, and other groups as they really, I think, did an amazing job in terms of leading the field as advocates and really being able to move the science and seeing, though, what it took to be able to get from just diagnosis and all the way through now, thankfully, treatments for both of those conditions for almost all patients. I will say almost, we're not quite there yet. So I think about things in terms of scalability and in terms of leaving no one behind. And, you know, as we've been talking about doing that, how do we do it better, faster, cheaper, not leaving aside quality, but also in terms of inclusivity is really important to me. And so anyway, hopefully I know it doesn't get there overnight, but hopefully we're well on our way to get there through things like what we're talking about at this meeting.
Perfect. And I'm Rachel. I'm leading some drug discovery efforts at BridgeBio, which is a small biotech company focused on rare disease. I'm working with Karmen on this research readiness roadmap.
I know.
Okay, I'll start over. Does this work? Is this working? Yes. Okay, let me try again. So I'm Rachel. I'm leading drug discovery efforts at a small biotech called BridgeBio, where we work across rare diseases. So I'm here to bring the industry perspective to this effort, and we're going to explain today a little bit about a research road mapping effort, and then we have a roundtable as well later to discuss. So I've had a chance to connect with some of you, but hopefully more as the day goes on. And at the end also we'll share some contact info so you can continue to reach out to us. And this is just the beginning of the conversations, really.
Perfect. I know you're about to pass it, but we
I
don't
know.
need it. So, as I've reflected on what I've heard at the exchange so far, I think there are a couple of speakers who really spoke to this need to help develop some kind of a framework for rare disease groups to understand kind of how to attack all of the potential work that could lie before them in getting to kind of clinical trial readiness. So yesterday, Wendy Erler, when she talked about the importance of being counted, one of the things that I thought was so interesting that came out of that report was that based on the maturity of the disease, so based on our understanding of the disease, the diagnosability of that disease, and the engagement and involvement of the patient community, there's sort of these buckets that they created in recommendations. And so there's some recommendations that came out of that, in very, very early diseases, like that you need to make sure that your disease is represented and represented well in OMIM and Orphanet. And in later kind of more mature diseases, you need to take on natural history studies, for example. So I thought that was really useful. And then this morning, it was really poignant to me to hear Betsy Bogard talk about all of the clinical trials that are currently ongoing in FOP across, sponsored by 6 different industry sponsors. And like, how do you get from this to that, right? How do you get from, I need my disease to even be listed in OMIM, to there are 6 companies that are doing work in this. And so I think this really reflects well, part of what we've been pondering at RareX in collaboration with our corporate advisory council and some of the groups that we're collaborating with, and how to be really great partners to our patient advocacy partners in helping to create paths forward. So first, Wendy, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing both at Columbia and at Simons in particular in working together with rare disease patient groups to kind of move them forward.
Yep. So I'm just going to talk about sort of random things, or they're going to seem random, but there is a method to the madness. So in terms of the being counted, I'll just underscore what many others have said already, which is how critical that is. And as people are thinking about what to approach, I call it a hammer and a nail, and sort of partnering in terms of what tools can work for what diseases. And there are filters that literally people go through in terms of thinking about, I'll be blunt, market size, right, in terms of thinking about this, and we've heard this repeatedly. So one of the big initiatives that I've led is something called Guardian, which is newborn screening that's genomically based so that we leave no one behind. And like I said, when I look even around this room or when I look at who's diagnosed, we're not equitable in terms of which patients are being diagnosed. And on average, it's taking us 7 years to get to the patients who are diagnosed, but I can't tell you how many patients I've now diagnosed at autopsy who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or even 70s. And understanding that in the natural history ends up being incredibly important, not just in the United States, not just in the northern part of the hemispheres and on the globe internationally, but really for everyone. So the reason why I've really, and this has been in 3 years in the planning and the development in terms of doing this, and we've now launched this as sequencing gives us the ability to be infinitely flexible and to be able to now diagnose from a newborn period. And this got started, as I had alluded to before, based on what I learned from SMA. And that was really that as we were thinking about the first trials and treatment for SMA, a neurodegenerative condition, we really had to get in early if we were going to be successful. And I would argue the same is true for many of the conditions that you're representing, even the conditions like neurodevelopmental conditions that may not be officially degenerative, but absolutely, I think in terms of development, brain development continues after birth, and the sooner we can get in for that, the better we can do in terms of outcomes. So that's the first, I think, sort of universal solution in terms of stand up to be counted, is being able to do that and not leaving anyone behind. After that, I think there are really, as I think about, and others that are thinking about therapies, it's really thinking about, like I said, what are the hammers, what are the screwdrivers, what are the wrenches, and what I mean by that are there different dimensions in terms of mechanism that the mutations in the genes work by, and different tools that then fit with that. And so I think as different companies are looking in terms of what to work on, they're trying to make those matches. And so being able to get that foundational basic science in terms of what your mechanism, and there may be more than one for your gene or disease, I think is critical in terms of opening up those gates. And then I won't go through it a lot more, but we've heard all about in terms of then understanding the natural history. I will say that once you start ascertaining through things like newborn screening, you realize that what you thought was a natural history is actually not always the natural history or not representative. And there can be quite a few surprises. And so I think it's important, even though you think you know what the condition is, to kind of reset once you identify folks in a global way. So I'll pause there. There's a lot more I could say, but I think in terms of doing that, if you can get those basic things to de-risk it and being able to do that, all of a sudden you're going to see the floodgates open, especially if, like I said, you're the perfect nail for the perfect hammer. All of a sudden it's a perfect match and things really start moving quickly. And that's really what I hope we get to the point, is being able to, in a modular way, I tell a lot of my patients, this is like a step function, right? Once we get some of these breakthrough technologies and we can prove the technology itself is safe and effective, we should be able to scale many conditions all of a sudden, not quite instantaneously, but very, very quickly if we know those basic foundational principles.
Wendy, can I ask you, when you talk about making sure that we don't leave anybody behind, and you particularly kind of alluded to the fact that in a couple of the, I'll say, common rare diseases, right? So SMA and cystic fibrosis, there's now treatment for almost all, but not quite all. And I think this is really, really important in rare disease communities, this idea that many of these communities aren't going to be universally treated by one type of approach, even within one rare disease. Right? So depending upon the underlying type of genetic mutation and how that affects the protein and the downstream physiology. So what, I don't know, as you've worked with patient groups in rare diseases, particularly in pediatric neurologic diseases, do you have any takeaways about that, about like the community and how a community both comes together toward therapeutic progress and also recognizes these differences and tries to pull that together in some kind of strategic way?
Right. So just take the dimension of, as you said, the brain, but you could think about brain conditions, liver conditions, heart conditions, but I'm going to do it by part of the body. One of the biggest challenges we have for brain conditions is being able to do delivery, right? So being able to get it into the brain, getting it equitably throughout all of the brain, not too much, not too little in terms of doing this. And that's one of those enabling technologies that's a step function. Once that problem is solved, all of a sudden that opens the floodgate to a huge group of disorders. And so collectively, and part of the question is always, so who funds that? Who is the enabler to do that? Because that's not condition specific, it's a whole group of conditions, similar to what we heard about in terms of copy number variants in a similar way, sort of as a class. As you think about delivery, then there are other technologies in terms of doing that. So we've heard about ASOs. Is it ASO? Is it an AAV? Is it a gene addition? Is it an editing technology? There are many ways of being able to do that once you get it in the brain. And so that's a second module, a second piece in terms of the technology to do that. And as you're alluding to, even within one gene, the way I would work for a splicing mutation, for instance, might be different if I'm talking about a gain of function missense allele, sorry for the technical jargon, but different types of genetic variants. In other words, there are all of these different multiple dimensions that go in terms of figuring out what's just right in terms of the technology. Once I can get it into the brain, and then I'm going to bring it in again, especially for brain disorders, it's a question of timing. And the efficacy of treatment for a 2-day-old versus a 2-year-old versus a 20-year-old are very, very different. And so in terms of doing that, that's why I keep emphasizing early diagnosis, being able to do it sort of en masse. It's the ultimate de-risking, right? Across all genetic rare conditions, 10,000, boom. In terms of if we had treatments for them, they would be part of newborn screening. We'd get these, sort of onto the roadmap and get people diagnosed. And so it's a little bit of a, sort of these two things are yoked together. But one important lesson I learned from SMA is we could move these forward simultaneously. Just to be very, very clear on this, when we were doing the first ASO trials was the time that I brought out the SMA newborn screening pilot. We did not have an effective treatment already, but we did have a clinical trial. And so with that, what we told parents is, you can find this out. I can't guarantee you've got a cure, but this is otherwise a lethal condition. If you'd like to know about this and like to have an opportunity to be in a trial, Those two things obviously go together. And that's what I would argue, if we're really trying to gain time, we need to think about being able to do these two things simultaneously, not sequentially, but always giving people the option, right? This is not a requirement, this is an option that we give people. And I can tell you from what we've been doing in newborn screening that a lot of people are saying, yes, I want to do that. 72% as of this morning, parents are saying, yes, they would like to do those types of things. And even for neurodevelopmental conditions like the ones you were talking about, where I don't have a cure right now or even an effective treatment, 90% of those parents who say they want to do it say, sign me up for those types of conditions as well. So I think people are voting with their feet, and I think the average parent wants the best thing that they can do for their child. And I think as we demonstrate more and more how efficacious this can be, I think more and more of those parents will gain the trust and the assurance to go forward and do those types of things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, Rachel, we're going to bring it home. We're going to let Rachel really talk about the work that we're trying to do to develop a framework to work hand in hand with our advocacy partners and try to prioritize the work to be done.
Great. So we're going to cover what is research readiness. I think it's been teed up multiple times, so this should be easy for me. Thank you. And why it's important. What are the key components of research readiness? How will RareX empower patient communities to get research ready? Our current progress thus far, what we're thinking about in terms of next steps, and our longer-term goals. So we've heard about this, and you guys are all keenly aware that there are more than 10,000 rare diseases. And the overwhelming majority of these diseases lack safe and effective treatments. So there's no shortage of unmet need for pharma companies to tackle. We also know that drug discovery is expensive. It costs about $1 billion to bring a new drug to market. It's slow. It takes about 10 to 15 years on average to develop one new medicine from initial target discovery through regulatory approval. And there's a lot of failures, so less than 1 out of 10 drugs in phase 1 actually gets approved. So from the pharma perspective, what you try to do is to mitigate risks by evaluating diseases across key metrics before you even take on a new program. And those key metrics fall into 4 big buckets. So disease biology characterization, therapeutic readiness, clinical trial readiness, and patient population and engagement. And very simplistically, the more boxes that you can check, the more info that you have, the more attractive the starting point is for a pharma company to pick this up and run with it. So what we're trying to do here is really to enable research readiness for every rare disease so that we can accelerate the discovery and development of meaningful therapeutics. You know, Luke was up here talking about KIF1A, and of course he's done a fantastic job of making a roadmap for treatment for that rare disease. How can we help others and shorten that time span to get this done? And so what we've started to do is really to define the components that underlie research readiness and outline the path to get there, to ensure that the right data are generated and collected on the RareX platform. And then that will really enable and engage the drug discovery efforts that we need to develop therapeutics. And again, with this goal of fostering this patient, academia, industry ecosystem. So what we've started to do is just to develop a survey to assess the current state of knowledge for any rare disease. And so what we've done is flesh out each of those 4 big buckets into some of the key pieces of information. So for example, in the patient population and engagement bucket, you know, things like, what is the diagnostic journey? Are there natural history studies in place? Is there a patient registry? Is it US or global? Is there a good understanding of what the key disease symptoms are that are most impacting quality of life and where patients want treatments? And we've started to pilot this effort with help from the International FOXP1 Foundation. So a shout out to Carl Whitney and as well as some other members of their group as well. And what we've done is to, again, using that survey that we've generated, identify the key components of research readiness, generate the survey to query each aspect of research readiness, have Carl answer to the extent that he can where FOXP1 is in this process. And then this is the other exciting part, is really engaging key opinion leaders. So Dr. Joe Buxbaum from Mount Sinai School of Medicine to get his take, as well as a host of other KOLs that we've identified. So trying to get everybody on the same page with what's understood, what's not understood, what do we have in place, what don't we have in place, and starting to make some sort of ground truth in that space, because of course you talk to different people and you get different answers. And so one of the key things here is just getting everybody on the same page. Then the next step will really be to take that to the RareX Scientific Advisory Board for feedback. So it's not just compiling the data, it's making sure that the data are curated and that we can have experts look at it and understand, are the data validated? Are there conflicting data? And then the SAB can really help guide the patient advocacy group in terms of, these are the key priorities that you should be focusing on. These are the gaps. You have limited resources. This is where we would recommend you spend money and the types of things that you fund moving forward. So again, in terms of the intended outcomes for our current pilot study, it's defining the current status of FOXP1 syndrome research readiness, aligning on the top priorities for the FOXP1 research community in terms of research and drug development, and fostering some of those academia, industry, patient advocacy group collaborations. So in terms of looking ahead, so as I mentioned, we're still in the process of doing this pilot effort with the FOXP1 Foundation. What we want to do is, of course, learn from that. What worked? We've already learned a lot. What didn't work? How can we do better? And then begin to scale this effort. Ideally, generating a user interface on the RareX platform with questions that will enable the roadmap to be automatically populated. As I've said multiple times now, and it's been said throughout this conference, facilitating these patient, academia, industry ecosystems and connections, enabling pre-competitive consortia to achieve biomarker discovery, natural history studies, patient registries, and identifying and overlapping across diseases the different factors that could enable basket trials. So that's where we are. As I mentioned, here's some contact info, and we have a roundtable coming up as well, so feel free to reach out to me or Karmen or Wendy there as well. And
Yeah,
I think that's...
thank you. I think I'll add to that before, and I think Nicole will be delighted that we're going to end with lots of time for questions. But when we first started working with the FOXP1 Foundation to try to figure out, where to even start with them, Susan, within their group, who's really led the patient community engagement, said essentially, I have no idea what most of these words mean, Karmen. I don't, and I'm probably not going to. What I'm good at is engaging the community and pulling the community together, and then we have our researcher advisors who work with us who are very good at taking on individual projects, but none of us have ever been able to really devote the kind of time collaboratively to prioritize what to work on. So it's been kind of haphazard, and we'll go to one KOL and say, what do you think we should fund next? We're going to do this fundraiser, what should we fund? And they'll say, you really need a new animal model. And then you go to somebody else and they'll say, you need a natural history study. And you go to somebody else and everybody has a different answer. And so I'm not sure that we have all the right answers yet, but we certainly want to try to create something in partnership that provides a path forward, and we'll iterate along the way. No doubt, we'll learn a lot along the way, and we're really trying to figure out how to engage the KOL community and our own scientific advisory board so that while we create something that's scalable, we're also creating something with lots of kind of check back in the system to ensure that if we say, yes, we've gotten past this point, and now here are the next few things of the greatest importance for your community, that that's undergone a quality check, right? Not just that there's an animal model available, but that there's an animal model available that has a phenotype that is closely aligned with the phenotype in this patient population that we actually want to treat, as an example. Okay, I think we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, and part of the challenge in doing this, making this template, is that every rare disease is different and they'll have different needs. So, you know, if you just followed a set of steps and it said create animal model, there are a ton of diseases where an animal model is just not going to be useful. And so, you know, being able to have the experts in the room with you to help guide you on what's important for you and your community, I think is the key advent here.
Thank you, you guys. Any questions? Yeah. I'll just say, Wendy Chung, thank you for making the check out from New York. I think we're very honored to have you. So for all of you in the room, if you need some Wendy time, now is the time to ask some questions.
Hi. Just a quick question about actually industry partners accessing all of the RareX database. Is there a templated form that essentially, and this is my ignorance, there might be already like information available. Is there a templated agreement or types of boilerplate things that industry partners engage, but also share risk going forward of the development pathway?
So I'm probably the best person to answer that one. So with patient permission, I'll start there, because on the RareX platform, all of the data that is collected and shared is shared with patient permission at different levels. So some patients want essentially all of their data shared as widely as possible to advance any research possible. Some only want IRB-approved research studies that are more specific to that disease area. So given that, all of that data is migrated over to Terra on the Broad Institute. So essentially, RareX has the data collection platform, but then we also have a data analytics or analysis platform utilizing the resources of the Broad on Terra. Within that, and I say that we have it, we do internally, it's not open yet, but it'll be launched by the end of September, which gives me a tiny bit of a heart attack, but that's okay, it's gonna happen. And so all of that data will be openly available to any researcher, whether that researcher is in academia, or that researcher is in industry, or that researcher is a citizen scientist researcher at a patient advocacy organization. There will be an application process that will be extremely easy and straightforward. And then we have a data access review committee that will review that for access. If you have an IRB approved research reason and you're a researcher, it will be approved. So essentially there won't be, like there are many, many data sets that exist where there are very specific research requests that you have to submit a request and you'll get a one-time kind of output. It will not exist like that. You will get access to the entire platform and all of the data that exists there on a de-identified but patient level basis.
I just want to say that this is just one quote that I have, and then I just think that it will really resonate with everybody. While I'm just one drop in the ocean, at the same time, we are all actually the entire ocean within one drop. So I just love how this emulates that every single person in this room matters in order to bring our dreams come true. Because without any one of us, we're losing so much key data and information that's in their brain. I mean, like if they're gone, then they're gone. So we're all just so very important. I just love how this conference is emphasizing the importance of everybody and not to leave anyone behind. It's just a very beautiful message. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. So we've heard the term de-identified a lot. So I'm wondering about recontactable? How do you go about recontacting a patient that might be grouped in one disease area but is different in their own right, thinking that every patient is different? So how is the mechanism of recontactable set up within RareX?
So I assume you guys also would like me to take this question. So the data that's available on Terra, on the research analytics platform, is de-identified. The data that's available within the RareX data collection platform is totally identified data, right? I mean, there's contact information in there. When people upload a genetic test report, it's typically a PDF with PHI all over the place, right? So that's very identifiable data. We ensure that everything that gets moved over to the analysis platform is de-identified. And so to use that example, all genetic testing data, discrete data elements are pulled out and moved over, as opposed to a PDF, which no researcher really wants anyway, right? You want queryable, discrete data elements. From a recontact perspective, I think that there are kind of three ways that I think about this. So, you know, we at RareX have all that identifiable data. We could certainly recontact patients for like additional research opportunities, if there's a sub-study, for example, that we might invite people into. So there's really zero barrier there at all. From a patient advocacy perspective, one of the sharing preferences that patients can say is whether or not they want their identifiable contact information, not all of their data, but their identifiable contact information shared with relevant patient advocacy organizations. And we are very open about what that means to relevant patient advocacy organizations, because we believe so strongly in this cross-disorder research, right? So we don't just want to say, well, if you came in to RareX through like the STX BP1 kind of front door, right? You came in through that mechanism, through their website, they're the only patient advocacy group that we would ever share that with. Because maybe you have a nonsense mutation, and we're working with a group that is specific, the Nonsense Mutation Foundation, that is looking at cross-disorder therapeutic approaches to patients who have those kind of mutations, and how do you approach that? So we want to make sure that we make those kind of connections as well. And then the third type, it's kind of a long answer, the third type of sort of identifiable kind of recontact is really around clinical trials and clinical trial recruitment. And that is something that we facilitate kind of hand in hand with our patient advocacy partners. We would never just like hand over a list of patients to an industry partner, but we absolutely would contact patients on their behalf who've said, I want to be contacted for clinical trial and other research opportunities.
Mike Raleigh, SingApp Research Fund. I lead the patient community that I'm a part of is very happily part of Simons, part of Citizen, part of RareX, talking to different people about different things. I'm not an idiot. I'm probably one of the stupidest people in this room, but I'm not dumb, and I struggle to put on one slide what is RareX, what is Citizen, what is what is Simons Searchlight? How are they the same? How are they different? And how should the totally normal people in my community think about them, sequence signing up for them, understand why on earth I want them to consent? Like, and it's a multi-step consent to these very important platforms, without which we would be completely screwed, right? So the question is one of, and I'm just acutely aware right now that in this room we are motivated by and supported by each other, and there's so many amazing advocates, right? I'm sitting next to Nasha and behind Luke, and I'm just like, yes, Nicole. But I gotta go back to my community and explain to them what the hell is going on. And then tell them to do things, and they're already exhausted. So how do we frame, like, who's helping the thousands of patient advocates communicate and explain and sequence these platforms. I'm not saying the platforms aren't necessary. I'm not saying anyone's done anything wrong, but I'm pointing to the next challenge of how do we tee this up and explain to normal people that they actually should click consent on multiple different platforms? Is there a whole other thing? Like, is there some massive umbrella consent where someone can just be like, yes, I consent to everything. Please just take my data and stop making me do things. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but like the next challenge is real.
Yeah. First of all, I think you totally undersell yourself because I watched your 10-minute podcast where you really highlighted these 3 different resources and the differences and commonalities and the why, and it was extremely well done. So I'm just going to say that. I would love, Wendy, if you would talk a little bit about, because you've been the PI of these different studies at the Simons Foundation for a long time, and thinking about patient consent, how patient consent has evolved over time, how you see that now in our partnership, and how you see that moving forward.
Yep. So anyway, it's an absolutely great point because I have trouble explaining this in plain language to my own patients. So I always ask the what's in it for me. Whenever I'm thinking about this, right, as a patient, what's in it for me in terms of doing this? And I personally, as long as I'm PI of the Simons Searchlight, am committed to the following sort of guiding principles. Number one, and you'll understand this. So I've got a day job at Columbia. The reason I do what I do at the Simons Foundation is because I am so incredibly driven by the mission and by the fact that we can bring resources to the rare disease community that I care so much about, and because I know they're committed for the long term to do that. So that budget, that money is not going away. We don't have to do fundraising to do that. We have a commitment, and I stand behind the dollars to do that. It doesn't matter who acquires who in the industry space. It doesn't matter an iota on fundraising. Doesn't matter if the market tanked earlier this week. Like, it does not matter. We are here to stay in terms of doing that. And that's why I was willing to put my name and my reputation behind it and to make sure we could do that for the community. So that's number one. I'll guarantee we're doing that for Simons Searchlight in terms of being able to do that. As that ecosystem has evolved around us, what I've always done is put patients first in terms of how we are going to be able to evolve with that ecosystem, and I'll remain committed to doing that as we go forward. So to the extent that there are other resources, other players that come in, whether they be Citizen, whether there be other things in terms of Rare X, we will continue to take patients and what they want to do, or participants and what they want to do with this, respect what they provide in terms of consent, and give them multiple options to be able to do that. But they will vote with their feet in terms of what they do. And if some people even change their mind over time as their lives evolve or as children grow up and have ideas on their own, I want them to be able to be in charge in terms of doing that. The other thing which I've advocated for very strongly is beyond just the registries that we're doing, is I realize that patient data is absolutely first and foremost, but we actually need to be able to put dollars behind the science and be able to do some of those cell lines and animal models and other things that we're talking about. And so the other part behind what we do at Simons Searchlight is not just paying for the registry, it's actually doing things like hosting scientific meetings for the scientists, being able to put money behind the resources, the libraries of whether they be rat models or mouse models or iPSCs, and then actually giving grants to the researchers to do that critical research. So we try and think about it strategically in terms of beginning to end within doing this, but we also want to make sure that we're putting the money to good use. So we do require that the scientists are good scientists who know what they're doing in terms of doing this, and we hope that you as the communities will help support and sort of pull them along, show them what the opportunities are. That within the larger eco-space, like I said, is that we also don't want to duplicate. So when Citizen says, for instance, that they can get EHR data and really go deep on that, that has value beyond or is complementary to what participants are reporting themselves. We believe that. We don't want to duplicate. We don't want to compete. And so I would look at those as things that are complementary in terms of Citizen, and then being able to push this all over into this larger ecosystem of RareX. So whether you come from here or here, we'll know who are the same people so that we know that we're not double counting, but we're absolutely committed that whoever puts their data in gets used in the most effective and comprehensive way possible.
And then I'll add to that kind of in a broader sense for everybody out there who's got similar questions about how do I boil this information down to get it out to my community, that we have a pretty amazing patient engagement team that will help put together messaging, that will work with you on what are your needs. And we'll do like little ad hoc things too. You know, I sat down with Deb at the HPA Association a couple of days ago at Global Genes, and she and I just did side-by-side like 3-minute videos that they posted about who is Rare X and why are we asking you to do this, about some commonly asked questions. Our patient engagement team will put together webinars based on what you need. So we're not going to just kind of leave you high and dry to figure all that messaging out. We're being
This really has to be the last question. Yeah, thanks.
We'll move it to the round table.
Okay, Mike Graylia, it's because of questions like that that continue to have us lean in and try to, oh my God, sorry, really try to figure these hard questions out, because there isn't a roadmap right now. Like this is all new. And so, you know, keep challenging, keep expecting everyone to do more, and really be working hard to ensure that we can make that happen. We don't have all the answers today, but I think it's super clear that everyone in this room is really committed to trying to make that happen, because, you know, like Dr. Chung said, you know, if we're truly here and committed to patients, streamlining, making things easier, you know, we're committed to it. And we might not have everything, you know, crystallized today, but you can be damn sure that we're really working hard to try to get done, because it's the right thing to do. So thank you for always pushing the needle and expecting more. It's what drives us all. So thank you.